Hello and welcome to the European Dialogue, brought to you by the EU Values Network. Join us to understand more about the European Union's approach to foreign policy, democracy, and European values through insightful discussions with experts from our network. Funded by the European Union's Erasmus Plus programme and part of the Jean Monnet network, we bring together over 100 academics from across the globe to challenge, debate, and enlighten us. I'm Emily Jones, and I'm pleased to guide you through the complex yet fascinating world of EU foreign policy. Hello and welcome. Our guest today is Professor Esther Barbé. Esther is a Professor of International Relations at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Her extensive research encompasses a wide range of critical areas, including Spanish foreign policy, European Union foreign policy, Euro-Mediterranean relations, gender and international security, power transitions, and the fundamental principles, values, and norms that guide the behaviour and policies of international organisations. She joins us on the show today to discuss her research on gender equality as a central value of the EU. So, welcome, Esther.
Thank you very much, Emily.
So great to meet with you today. I'm really excited to hear more about your research. Having already seen your video online, we'll put that in the podcast description, and having read some of your work as well. So yes, let's dive in then. Perhaps can you start by explaining for our listeners what gender equality means within the context of international human rights? I think it's good that we first of all outline why it is such a crucial area of research.
Yeah, well, in order to talk about human rights and how to frame gender equality within this context, I think we have to start talking about UN, about United Nations, because the United Nations Charter mentions directly equal rights between men and women. And we have also to remember that the United Nations adopted the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, reaffirming again this idea, the equal rights between women and men. So taking this beginning into consideration, then we have to move to the 1970s and seeing how this idea about equal rights is transformed into a new approach. This new approach is mostly discrimination against women. So this idea, discrimination against women, enters on the agenda. And one of the main results is the fact that in 1979, and that is a very, very important step, UN adopted a convention against to eliminate discrimination against women. And this is the first, if you want to say so, the first international framework for women's rights without saying that. I mean, we need to wait until the 1990s. This is a real momentum, the 1990s, and after the end of the Cold War, because at that moment there were many big conferences, world conferences on different issues, on human rights, on women, on environment, etc., etc. And the World Conference on Human Rights that took place in Vienna in 1993. It was the first time that we had a clear adoption of the idea that women's rights are human rights, and especially, for instance, there is a very specific issue, and this is the violence against women that was at that moment defined not as a discrimination issue, but a violation of human rights. So that's, let's say, in the middle of the 90s, that's when we're talking about this idea of human rights, women's rights as human rights. And especially at the time also, you were talking me about gender equality. The term gender equality was, if you want to say so, the problem was name. I mean, there was a name before. Okay, so one of the important things I would say in this mid-90s is the fact that for the very first time, UN, in a declaration that was adopted in 1993 by the General Assembly, were mentioning that there was the relations between men and women in any dimension, either economic, politics, society, etc., etc. It was an unequal relation. So there was a power relations there. There was a problem of a social structure. And this is why, this situation was defined as a gender equality problem. So we go in the 1990s beyond biological differentiations between men and women, and we are framing the issue, gender equality, as a social problem. And we are saying at the same time that gender equality is a human right.
Wow, that is crazy to think how far the understanding of gender has evolved, and so significantly since the 1990s in, I imagine, many of our listeners' lifetimes. I think it also highlights and is supported by the increase that we see of richer, more inclusive discussions in much of society. But have we seen the approach to gender equality change over time on a global scale?
Yes, I would say yes, because as I told you, in the 1990s, what we have is clearly defined what gender equality is. And then since that moment, what we have in terms of evolution is new norms, new policies, new institutions. So there is, let's say, a kind of institutionalization of the issue. For instance, new norms. What we can see is how the empowerment of women, that's the main idea, to overcome this inequality, is translated into norms for political participation, norms for socioeconomic development, norms to avoid violence against women, and norms on sexual and reproductive health and rights. I'm creating, let's say, like 4 important groups of norms. Then we have new policies. In fact, indeed, we could say that all the policies now, they have a kind of gender mainstreaming idea. But let's take just 2 main dimensions. One of them is development and the other is security. And if we look at development, that this is the more obvious one. We all know, that development policies are mainstreaming gender. But if we think on Agenda 2030, so we were thinking on sustainable development goals of this Agenda 2030, and that's the main guideline for development at the global level. The Goal 5 defines gender equality as a fundamental right, and it has plenty of objectives to be fulfilled until 2030 in terms of gender equality. For instance, one of the objectives is ending with child marriage. Then if we go to security, after development, we see how the UN Security Council adopted in 2000 Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. And one of the things that we see today is how all the peace operations, the UN peace operations, all of them, they have, gender advisors. All of them have, objectives in terms of course, women's protection, but also women's participation during the process during the conflict or after the conflict, in terms of solving the problems, peace process, etc. And I think that in terms of institutions, one of the big changes is that since 2010, we have one of the main agencies in UN is UN Women. UN Women has, if you want to say so, merged all the different organisms, etc., in the UN. It has become one of the most powerful agencies in UN, and now it's in charge of trying to, cross-cutting the organization with all the gender issues. So I would say that gender equality has evolved at all levels, mainstreaming policies, and now it's much more institutionalized.
Absolutely. That's so positive to hear. And great to hear a little bit more about UN Women as well. Having checked out their website before, I know they've got plenty of resources, guides, articles, and ways for people to get involved as well. So yeah, actually listeners, do check out this organisation if you haven't already. And well, Esther, zooming in then on the EU specifically, let's talk now about why is gender equality considered a central value?
Well, the EU itself, it defines itself as a community of values. So, for the EU, values mean our identity. Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union is indicating very especially democracy, the state of law, and protection of human rights. as values, the fundamental values, no, the fundamental stone of the building, and gender equality as a human right, of course, is in the center, of this community of values. And gender equality is supposed in 2024 today, inspiring all EU policies, either at interim policies, either at extreme policies. If we think on the EU as an international actor, the EU has been defined itself as a normative power in the world. I mean, we are not a power like the traditional ones. We are a new kind of power. And one of the characteristics, one of the drivers of our behavior is protecting human rights. So gender equality is part of those general objectives of our behavior in the world.
Yeah, thank you. I really loved your insight there about, you said the EU as a normative power, or moving away from a traditional power to a normative power, and then its drivers being rooted in that protection of human rights. And for me, it really just encapsulates perfectly the rationale behind initiatives like the EU Values Network even, because our goal really is to encourage and positively influence global behaviour. But then, okay, how has the EU been working to integrate gender equality into its core values? Are we seeing, for example, any specific policies being implemented? I imagine maybe a fairer labour market or a reduction in gender-based violence, perhaps.
Yeah, the EU has integrated, we could say, the idea and then converted into policies since the very beginning. Because if one looks at the Treaty of Rome in 1957, it already mentioned, the issue regarding social policy, and especially regarding equal pay, so the elimination of discrimination in terms of salaries. So that's the very first idea. So let's say that the EU, the European Community at the time started, with this objective mostly. Then the idea of equal pay became even a principle of the European Community, because there was a directive in the 70s, there was a sentence of the Court of Justice regarding this issue. But the EU is following the same process that the rest of the world, let's say. And then the 1990s means a real change. It's a turning point. So what happens in the 1990s is that the European Community turns into the European Union, and once it's turned into the European Union, we go much beyond the labor market, of course, and the idea, we have to go to positive action. And then in this case, the idea is very much gender mainstreaming all areas, all policies, and all stages of EU policy making. In fact, the Amsterdam Treaty already affirms that the gender equality is a fundamental value. And this is a process, that started in the 1990s, because it's a global process. Also because the EU changes inside, because it's enlarged, and some of the countries that are joining the Union, they are Nordic countries, and they already have, very developed gender equality policies. So they are bringing, they are, Europeanizing a little bit down up, bottom up, the idea. And, one of the things we can see very much is how also in the 1990s, the development policy of the Union changes. And we have gender action plans since that moment involving, all those policies in terms of priorities of external policies.
And would you say those policies have been successful? Or how successful?
Well, as always, we can say the bottle is half empty, the bottle is half full. But one thing I would like to mention, I would like to focus, because we had some talk these last weeks, is the fact that how much, the von der Leyen Commission, the last von der Leyen Commission, and then the new one, the president of the Commission, has changed the situation. Well, it was symbolic. I mean, she was the first time that a woman was chairing the European Commission. And one of the things that she wanted to do at the time, political participation, this is one of the objectives, was creating a 50-50 commission in terms of men and women. The previous one, the one that is just finishing now the work, it was 13 women out of 27 members. But the current one, this has been part of the problem too. I mean, it was quite easy, the 4 years before. Now it's becoming more difficult because von der Leyen was trying to ask the states, the member states to give a couple of names because she will feel free, to try to get to that 50-50. But now there was quite a reluctance from the states, and now it seems that it's going to be kind of 40% women, etc., etc. Well, anyway, the thing is that in terms of success or not, the idea is that, in fact, the Commission, launched a gender equality strategy in 2020. It's going to finish in 2025. And there were 3 main concerns. One of them was the classical one, gender pay gap. So there was a strategy proposing actions for improving the gap. The second one was equality between women and men in political and economic decision making. There is a strategy proposing EU action to promote equality. We don't know yet, in terms of results. But I would like to talk a little bit in terms of results about the third concern. The third concern was about gender-based violence, and what this strategy for 2020-2025 did was also adopting a strategy of actions to eliminate gender-based violence in the European Union. And regarding this case, we can say that the bottle is a bit complicated to say something, but I would say that we are stepping back in this area. We are stepping back because this issue, gender-based violence, has become a very divisive issue in the Union. In terms of norms, Europe has a norm to eliminate violence against women and domestic violence. This is a norm called Istanbul Convention that was adopted in 2011 by the Council of Europe. And all the members of the Union are members of the Council of Europe. So they have to sign the treaty and then they have to ratify the treaty. And at present, there are 5 countries that have not ratified this treaty. Those countries are Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechia, Lithuania, and Slovakia. So this is part of the problem that we would say, okay, in this community of values, and we are all members of the Council of Europe, who is the organization, the international organization that has a system to protect human rights in Europe. There is already, if you say so, a division. That's quite obvious. But then the other thing, and this debate took place, the last 2 years, is that the Union wanted to endorse this Istanbul Convention as a member, the Union as such. So the Union had to ratify also this convention. And here there was a clear problem because some of those countries were absolutely against the fact that the Union endorsed this convention. And which are the reasons or the arguments, to be against endorsing that norm? There are 2 main arguments in general. One of them, we could say, is sovereignty arguments. Some countries think that an issue such as violence against women should be a national concern, not a regional or European concern, not an international concern. So we went back our sovereignty in those issues. And the other issue is related with mostly, let's say, liberal values. The thing that those, maybe Orban would be one of those persons really using these kind of arguments. Those values are not traditional European values. They are those liberal values that we really don't want to endorse as such. So the thing is that we have a fragmentation regarding this norm and regarding this objective of the Commission.
Oof. Okay. Well, okay, let's break that down a little bit more now to discuss the main challenges of maintaining gender equality for the EU. You just touched on some of the challenges, like, for example, having fair representation at the Commission level, having a strategy that truly closes that pay gap and reduces gender-based violence. It's just so awful to hear that you found the protection against gender-based violence to be going the wrong direction. Do you think, and how do you think this increase in liberal ideologies you've mentioned are blocking that positive progress towards gender equality?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the main challenges, the example I mentioned is quite clear, no? The example regarding gender-based violence. And I think that the problem is that gender equality norms are victims of the political polarization process that is taking place at all levels. We can see it at UN, we can see it at the European Union, we can see it at domestic levels, European democracies, no? How they are being undermined by those cleavages. So the thing is that we have right now some states, some organizations of the civil society that are really supporting gender norms as they have been defined since the 1980s, since the Beijing Convention in Convention on Women in 1995. And we have at the same time another group of states and some civil society organizations that they are being called right now like the anti-gender movement, you know, mostly some populist parties, some autocracies or countries going in the direction of autocracies. But we also had this kind of position in the United States during Trump period. I mean, regarding all those things, there are names like Bolsonaro, Duterte, Orban, Salvini, no? I mean, they really took a position that creates a problem in terms of developing gender equality. So we really have this kind of clash between liberal values, traditional liberal values adopted by the European Union, or people that they call about European traditional values. And I think that now during the Hungarian presidency of the European Union, we are seeing this very clearly. And we see this at the European Parliament.
It's really concerning. It's really concerning to hear about there being such a divide in values that are emerging within the EU. More than ever, we need to be aware of these issues and what governments are doing, I think. It also highlights to me the crucial importance of your research, Esther. And well, with that in mind, my final question for you, what recommendations would you give to address the threats in gender equality in the EU for both our listeners, but also national governments that may lean on academic research for policy making?
Yeah, well, I would say that maybe it's a moment for realism. I don't say pragmatism, but I would say realism. This is not a moment. Maybe the policy would be containment. You know, main idea is containment in the sense of trying to protect the existing norms. I know that there is a big debate among civil society organizations. Some of them, they want, you know, to try to advance, but some others say, okay, the problem is that maybe if we open discussions in international organizations, the problem is that, you know, sometimes language we used all the time now is impossible to use it. I can put an example, for instance, in the UN, the UN Security Council, regarding survivors of sexual violence in conflict. It was quite normal to use the term of, you know, they have rights to sexual and reproductive or assistance, services, etc. Now it's impossible to use this language anymore because some people think that if you use this language, it doesn't mean that maybe the survivors, they can have abortion and they don't want them to have abortion. So, you know, this idea better to keep what already exists. And if we think, for instance, on the current European Parliament and the members of the European Parliament and the presence of those, let's say, extreme right parties, populist parties, etc., this is going to make much more difficult, keeping the gender norms, because the European Parliament has been traditionally one of the entrepreneurs in favor of gender equality in the European Union. And if we think in terms of how to behave at the international level, I would say that maybe it's necessary to be strategic and trying to build alliances with those like-minded countries out of Europe, especially if they can be from the global south, those countries, and also with the agencies, the UN agencies, the UN Women, of course. And this is what we see, in fact. We see, in fact, how in the UN we have, a group of Europeans with maybe, Canada, Australians, some African countries, some Latin American countries, etc., supporting norms. And then, what to do? Was maybe entrenching. If what the anti-gender movement wants is to redefine the norm, and maybe adapting if just the problem is, procedures, how to do things. Because at the same time, we've been talking about the content of the norm, but the other thing is how the norms are implied. And anything related with transparency, with participation of civil society, etc., those are also, let's say, practices that now are contested. So I think that, as I said, being realistic and being strategic maybe would be the main kind of approach, to the current situation.
Yes, that definitely sounds like solid advice there. Well, thank you, Esther. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks to you, Emily, for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely, anytime. And for those interested in diving deeper into these topics, we really encourage you to explore Professor Barbé's extensive body of work, which we'll link to in the podcast description. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, and then share with your network. And stay tuned for more episodes where we will bring you conversations with leading experts in the field. Until next time, take care and stay informed.